The girl couldn't have been more than 4 years old when she appeared at Dominic Santoro's door, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear torn clean off. She didn't cry. That was the first thing that struck him. Most kids would have been wailing, but this one just stood there in the September rain, her dark eyes locked on his, waiting. The second thing that struck him was what she said, her voice small but certain. "My mama told me to find you. She said you're my grandpa because my daddy was your son." Dominic Santoro had built an empire on knowing when someone was lying. 30 years running the Brooklyn docks, laundering money through 3 legitimate businesses, keeping cops and rivals at arm's length. You didn't survive that long without a sense for deception. But when he looked down at this rain-soaked child, something in his chest went tight. He hadn't seen his son Marco in 6 years. Marco, who'd walked away from the family business, who'd told Dominic he'd rather die poor than live dirty. Marco, who disappeared into some nowhere town in Pennsylvania and never called. "What's your name?" Dominic asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Lily." He should have shut the door, should have called social services, let them sort it out. Instead, he stepped aside and let her in, and that single decision would unravel everything he thought he knew about loyalty, blood, and the debts we carry without knowing. The first week, Dominic told himself it was temporary. He set Lily up in the guest room of his Cobble Hill brownstone, bought her clothes that actually fit, and hired Maria, his housekeeper's daughter, to watch her during the day while he handled business. Lily didn't ask questions. She colored quietly at the kitchen table, ate whatever Maria put in front of her, and went to bed without protest. It was unnatural, that compliance. Like she'd learned early that making noise brought trouble. On the 8th day, Dominic sat her down at breakfast. "Your mother," he said carefully. "Where is she?" Lily's hand paused over her cereal. "Hospital. She got sick." "What hospital?" "The one with the blue sign." Dominic made calls. It took 3 hours, but he found her. Rebecca Voss, 29, admitted to Mercy General in Allentown with late-stage pancreatic cancer. No family listed. No next of kin except a daughter currently in foster care. Except the daughter wasn't in foster care, was she? She was eating Lucky Charms in a crime boss's kitchen. He drove to Allentown that night. Left Lily with Maria and took 2 of his men, though he wasn't sure why he needed them. The hospital room was dim, machines beeping their monotonous rhythm, and the woman in the bed looked like she weighed maybe 90 pounds. Her eyes, though, when they opened and found his, those were sharp. "You came," Rebecca whispered. "You sent your daughter to my house with a story about my son." "It's not a story." She shifted, wincing. "Marco and I. We were together for 2 years. He was working construction, trying to be someone different than what he came from. When I got pregnant, he was happy. Terrified, but happy." She coughed, and it sounded like paper tearing. "Then one night, 3 men came to our apartment. They beat him. They said it was a message from someone he owed. They said next time they'd kill him." Dominic's jaw clenched. "I sent no one." "I know, he told me it wasn't you. But he left anyway, said he'd bring danger to us just by existing. I haven't seen him in almost 4 years." "Where is he now?" Rebecca's eyes filled. "I don't know. He called once maybe 2 years ago, said he was sorry. Said he was staying away to keep us safe." She reached for the bedside table, her hand trembling, and pulled out a photograph. "But Lily is his. Look at her. Look at him." Dominic took the photo. It showed Marco, younger and smiling in a way Dominic had never seen, holding a baby. The resemblance was undeniable. Same dark eyes, same stubborn chin. He thought of the night Marco had left, the screaming match in Dominic's office. "You think money makes you a king? It makes you a prisoner." Those had been Marco's last words. "Why send her to me now?" Dominic asked. "Because I'm dying and she has no one else. Because whatever you are, you're her blood." Rebecca's breathing turned ragged. "Promise me you'll keep her safe. Promise me you'll find Marco and tell him. Tell him he has a daughter who needs him." Dominic looked at the photograph again. At his son's face, so full of hope it seemed like another person entirely. "I promise," he said, and meant it. 3 weeks later, Rebecca Voss died. Dominic arranged the funeral, small, quiet, just him, Lily, Maria, and a priest who didn't ask questions. Lily stood beside the grave in a black dress that Maria had bought, and she didn't cry then either. Dominic wondered if she'd cried at all since her mother sent her away. That night, he legally filed for guardianship, and his lawyer, a man who'd helped bury bodies both legal and literal, asked only one question. "Are you sure about this, Dom?" He wasn't. But he'd made a promise, and Dominic Santoro kept his promises. Lily settled into his life like water finding cracks. She learned the housekeeper's schedule, memorized which days Dominic took meetings at home versus at the restaurant he owned in Red Hook. She was smart, scary smart, and by December she'd figured out that Uncle Tony wasn't really her uncle, and the men who visited with briefcases weren't discussing the produce business. "Are you a bad man?" she asked him one night. They were watching a Christmas special on TV, her head against his shoulder in a rare moment of closeness. Dominic considered lying. "I've done bad things to protect what's mine." "Did you protect my daddy?" "I tried. He didn't want to be protected." She processed this silently then. "Will you protect me?" "Yes. Even from bad things you do." That question hit harder than any federal indictment. "Yes," he said again, quieter. January brought snow and a new wrinkle. One of Dominic's lieutenants, a man named Sal Russo who ran the gambling operations, started asking questions. Why was the boss playing house with some random kid? Where'd she really come from? Dominic shut it down hard, but he felt the shift. His men were wondering if he'd gone soft, if grief or age had made him vulnerable. Then, on a Tuesday morning, his lawyer called. "Dom, we've got a problem. Someone filed a challenge to your guardianship. Says the child isn't related to you and you're an unfit guardian given your associations." "Who filed?" The motion came from Alinda Voss. "Turns out she's Rebecca's half-sister. Lives in Ohio. She wants custody." Dominic hung up and immediately made another call. By that afternoon, he knew everything about Linda Voss. Divorced, worked as a bank teller, had a restraining order filed against her by her ex-husband for harassment. Not exactly Mother of the Year material. But she'd also filed a DNA petition, which meant blood tests, which meant Dominic would need to prove Marco was Lily's father, and he couldn't prove that without finding Marco. He hadn't searched for his son in 6 years. Part of him, the part that still ached from Marco's rejection, hadn't wanted to know where he'd gone or who he'd become. But now he had no choice. He put word out through every contact he had. Construction sites, off-the-books employers, places a man might work if he was trying to disappear. The search turned up nothing for 3 weeks. Then, in late February, a call came from a source in Pittsburgh. "There's a guy working at a steel fabrication shop. Goes by Mark Vincent, matches your description, keeps to himself." Dominic was on the road within an hour. Pittsburgh's industrial district looked like every other Rust Belt casualty. Chain-link fences, corrugated metal buildings, men in Carhartt jackets who'd learned to mind their own business. Dominic found the fabrication shop just as the evening shift was ending. He waited in his car, and when the workers filed out, he spotted him immediately. Marco had grown a beard and looked 20 pounds heavier, muscle earned from hard labor. But it was him. Dominic got out of the car. Marco stopped mid-stride when he saw him, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Marco turned, as if to run, and Dominic called out, "She told me to find you. Said you have a daughter who needs you." Marco froze. Slowly, he turned back. "Rebecca sent you?" "Rebecca's dead. Pancreatic cancer. She died in January." The color drained from Marco's face. He staggered, caught himself against a pickup truck. No, she... I called her. I was going to visit. I just needed to save enough money to..." "She sent your daughter to me before she died. Little girl named Lily, 4 years old. Looks just like you." Marco slid down the side of the truck until he was sitting on the frozen ground. He put his face in his hands, and his shoulders shook. Dominic stood there, useless, watching his son break apart. After a long moment, Marco looked up, his eyes red. "I didn't know. Rebecca never told me she was sick. I thought I was keeping them safe by staying away." "Safe from what? Who beat you?" "Guys who said I owed them money. I never borrowed from anyone, Dad. I worked clean jobs, paid my way. But they knew who my father was, and they thought that meant I had access to cash." A cold rage settled in Dominic's chest. Someone had used his name to terrorize his son. Someone inside his organization had broken the most sacred rule, family was untouchable. Did you recognize them? One of them. I saw him once at your restaurant when I was younger. Dark hair, scar across his knuckles. Dominic knew exactly who that was. Sal Russo. The same lieutenant who'd been asking questions about Lily. They drove back to Brooklyn together, Marco in the passenger seat, silent and shell-shocked. Dominic told him everything. Rebecca's death, Lily's arrival, the custody challenge, the DNA petition. Marco listened, his jaw tight, and when Dominic finished, he said, "I want to see her, right now." It was past midnight when they arrived at the brownstone. Maria had put Lily to bed hours ago, but Dominic led Marco upstairs anyway. They stood in the doorway of the guest room, Lily's room now, watching the small shape under the blankets, the stuffed rabbit tucked against her cheek. Marco made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. "She's real," he whispered. "I have a daughter. You had 6 years to figure that out." Marco's eyes hardened. "Don't. You don't get to judge me for running when your world is what I was running from." They stood in tense silence until Dominic said, "There's something else. The men who beat you, one of them works for me. I'm going to deal with it." "How?" "You don't need to know." "Yes, I do. Because if you're going to raise my daughter in this house, I need to know exactly what kind of protection you're offering." It was the most direct challenge Marco had thrown at him since he was 17. Dominic met his son's gaze and saw not the angry kid who'd walked away, but a father terrified for his child. "Sal Russo is done," Dominic said. "He went behind my back, used my name for extortion. That's a death sentence in this business, but I won't do it here, and I won't involve you." Marco looked back at Lily, sleeping peacefully. "Make him tell you who else was involved. Make him tell you everything." 2 nights later, Dominic called a meeting at his restaurant after hours. All his lieutenants attended. Sal Russo, Tony Marchetti, Frankie Costa, and 3 others. They gathered in the private back room, a space with no windows and soundproofed walls. Dominic stood at the head of the table, Marco standing against the back wall, arms crossed. "Sal," Dominic said, his voice calm. "Tell me about the construction worker you shook down in Allentown 6 years ago." Sal's face went carefully neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The man you beat. The man you told was being sent a message from me." "Boss, I've never been to Allentown." Dominic set a folder on the table. Inside were photos. Surveillance stills pulled from traffic cameras showing Sal's car on the Pennsylvania Turnpike on the dates in question. A medical report describing Marco's injuries, and a bank statement showing deposits into Sal's account that matched the timeline. Dominic's people had worked fast. "You used my name to extort money from my son," Dominic said, and the temperature in the room dropped. "You broke the oldest rule." Sal's carefully neutral expression cracked. He looked around the table, seeking allies, but Tony and Frankie had already shifted their chairs back. No one wanted to be close to a marked man. "It wasn't personal," Sal said quickly. "I didn't know he was your son. He was just some guy trying to go straight, and I thought, you thought you'd scare him. You thought you'd make money off his fear. And when he ran, you didn't care that he left behind a woman and a child. I didn't know about any kid. That's not the point." Dominic leaned forward. "The point is you acted without authority. You damaged what was mine. And now there's a question I need answered. Who else was with you?" Sal's eyes darted to the door, calculating odds. Dominic nodded slightly and Tony stood, blocking the exit. "Names, Sal. Tommy Grillo and Vinny something. I don't remember his last name. They're not your guys. I hired them freelance." "Where are they now?" "Tommy's dead. Overdose last year. Vinny, I don't know. We only worked that one job together." Marco pushed off the wall. Why target him specifically?" Sal finally looked at Marco, and something like regret flickered across his face. "Because word on the street was Dominic Santoro's son walked away from the family. I thought if I could bring you back, prove you still owed loyalty, maybe the boss would notice me. I was trying to impress him." He laughed bitterly. "Guess it didn't work." Dominic felt a weariness settle into his bones. 30 years of loyalty built on fear, respect, and blood, and it still produced men like Sal, ambitious, short-sighted, willing to break the people Dominic cared about for a chance at advancement. "Get him out of here," Dominic said to Tony. "You know what needs to happen." Sal's face went white. "Boss, please, I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." Too late for that. Dominic stood and walked out, Marco following. Behind them, they heard Sal start to plead. Then the sound of a scuffle as Tony and Frankie dragged him away. Marco didn't ask what would happen next. He didn't need to. The DNA test results came back in March. Marco was confirmed as Lily's biological father, and the custody challenge collapsed. Linda Voss withdrew her petition after a strongly worded letter from Dominic's lawyer hinted at evidence of financial instability and past legal troubles. The case was sealed, and Lily remained in Dominic's guardianship with Marco as co-guardian. Marco moved into the brownstone. At first, he and Lily circled each other like wary animals. She'd learned not to trust easily, and he was terrified of failing her the way he'd already failed her mother. But slowly, carefully, they built something. Marco taught her to play checkers. She showed him her coloring books. One night, Dominic came downstairs to find them asleep on the couch together, Lily's head on Marco's chest, his arm around her protectively. It should have been perfect. It should have been the happy ending. But Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Sal was gone, but the damage he'd done rippled outward. And then, in April, a federal agent named Karen Reese showed up at the restaurant. She flashed her badge, cool and professional. "Mr. Santoro, I'm investigating allegations of racketeering, money laundering, and extortion. I have a warrant to search your business premises and financial records." Dominic called his lawyer, but he already knew this was different. The feds had something solid, probably Sal's records or testimony he'd given before Tony silenced him. For the next 3 weeks, agents crawled through every corner of his operation. They seized computers, froze bank accounts, and brought in Dominic's employees for questioning. Marco watched it happen with barely concealed satisfaction. "This is what you built," Marco said one evening, as news vans camped outside the brownstone. "This is the protection you offered. I've kept this family safe for 30 years. Safe," Marco's laugh was harsh. "Mom died hating you. I ran across 3 states to escape your shadow. And now my daughter is on the news because her grandfather is a mobster. I've given Lily everything she needs. Except normalcy. Except a future where she doesn't have to explain why her family is under federal investigation." They stood in Dominic's study, 2 men who'd never learned how to talk without fighting. Lily's voice broke the tension, small, scared, coming from the doorway. "Are they going to take me away?" Both men turned. She stood there in her pajamas, the stuffed rabbit clutched tight. Marco crossed the room and picked her up. "No, sweetheart, no one's taking you anywhere. Promise, I promise." Marco looked at Dominic over her head. "Whatever happens, she comes first. Agree?" Dominic nodded. "Agreed." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Dominic's accountants, a man named Leo who'd worked for him for 15 years, approached him privately with a ledger. "I kept a separate record," Leo said quietly. "Clean record. Every legitimate transaction, every legitimate source of income. If the feds are going after you for money laundering, this proves you've got legal businesses that can account for your wealth." Dominic studied the ledger. It was meticulous, payroll for the restaurant, rental income from properties he owned, investments in legitimate construction projects. "Why show me this now?" "Because I've watched you with that little girl, and I've watched your son come home. Maybe it's time to walk away from the dirty side, boss. Maybe it's time to be what Marco always wanted you to be." It was a radical thought. Dominic Santoro, who'd built his empire on fear and favors, going legitimate. But as he looked at the ledger, he realized Leo wasn't wrong. He had the infrastructure. He had the resources. What he'd lacked was the motive, and Lily had given him that. He handed the ledger to his lawyer. "Use this. Show them I've been transitioning out of the illegal operations. Cooperate with their investigation on the condition that any prosecution focuses on past actions, not future ones." His lawyer raised an eyebrow. "You're going to flip. I'm going to retire." The negotiation took months. Dominic provided testimony about past operations, carefully omitting details that would implicate men still loyal to him, and in exchange, the federal prosecutors agreed to limit charges. He pled guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering, received a suspended sentence, and agreed to forfeit certain assets. The restaurant, The brownstone and his legitimate investments remained his. It was, by mob standards, a miracle. By August, the news vans were gone. Dominic's name appeared in the papers one last time, in a brief article about a notorious crime figure's retirement. Marco enrolled Lily in kindergarten at a private school in Brooklyn Heights. She made friends, learned to read, and slowly started laughing more. The trauma of losing her mother faded into something manageable, held at bay by structure, love, and therapy with a child psychologist who specialized in grief. One Saturday in September, exactly 1 year after Lily had appeared at Dominic's door, they had a birthday party for her. Just family. Marco, Dominic, Maria, and a couple of kids from Lily's class. They ate cake, played games in the backyard, and for a few hours they looked like any other American family. That evening, after the guests left, Lily climbed into Dominic's lap. "Grandpa, did you find my daddy like you promised?" Dominic glanced at Marco, who was cleaning up wrapping paper. "I did, and you kept me safe. I tried my best." She leaned her head against his chest. "Mama would be happy. She said you were scary, but you'd protect me." Something in Dominic's chest cracked open. "Your mama was right. Are you still scary?" He thought about Sal Russo, about the money and violence that had defined his life, about the cost of protection. "Not anymore," he said. "Not to you." Marco joined them, sitting on the couch beside Lily. For the first time since he'd walked away at 22, he looked at his father without anger. "Thank you," Marco said quietly, "for bringing me home, for giving me a chance to be her father." Dominic nodded. Words had never been easy between them, but maybe they didn't need to be. Maybe what they'd built over the past year, fragile, imperfect, but real, was enough. That night, Dominic pulled out the photograph Rebecca had given him in the hospital, the one of Marco holding baby Lily. He set it on his desk next to a newer photo, the three of them at Lily's kindergarten graduation. 2 images, one story, a story of a man who'd spent his life taking things and had finally learned what it meant to give something back. The following months brought a rhythm to their lives. Marco got a job managing a construction crew, legitimate work that paid enough to contribute to the household. Dominic spent his days overseeing his legal businesses and, increasingly, volunteering at a local community center, a form of penance, maybe, or just a way to fill the hours now that he wasn't running an empire. Lily thrived, her teacher reporting that she was bright, curious, and kind. But the past has a way of refusing to stay buried. In November, a man showed up at the restaurant. He introduced himself as Vinnie Calabrese, and when Dominic's manager called to warn him, Dominic felt ice in his veins. Vinnie, the third man who'd beaten Marco. The one Sal claimed he didn't know. Dominic met him in the same back room where he'd confronted Sal. Vinnie was in his 40s, graying at the temples, with the cautious posture of a man who'd learned to watch his back. "Mr. Santoro," he said, "I hear you've retired." "I have." "That's good, smart. I wanted to come here in person to tell you something." He pulled out a folded piece of paper. 6 years ago, I worked a job with Sal Russo. We hurt your son. I didn't know who he was at the time. Sal just said it was a collection job. When I found out later, I realized Sal had played me. Where's this going? I heard Sal's gone. I heard you made him pay. But I want you to know, I didn't keep any of that money. I gave my share to a women's shelter in Allentown. Figured if I'd hurt a man who was trying to be good, the least I could do was put that money toward something good too. He set the paper on the table. That's the receipt. Donation made in Rebecca Voss's name. Dominic looked at the receipt. $15,000 donated 2 years ago. He looked back at Vinnie. Why tell me this now? Because I heard about the little girl. And I wanted you to know that even in your world, some of us try to do right when we can. I'm sorry for what happened. Truly. It was, in Dominic's experience, one of the strangest conversations he'd ever had. A man confessing to a crime against his family, offering not excuses but apology and proof of attempted redemption. "You should leave New York," Dominic said finally. "There are people who remember that night." "I know. I'm heading to Florida tomorrow. Just wanted to clear this up first." Vinnie stood. "For what it's worth, I'm glad your son made it home. I'm glad the girl has family." After he left, Dominic sat alone with the receipt. It didn't absolve Vinnie, didn't erase the damage. But it was something, a small gesture in a world where gestures were rare. He took the receipt home and showed it to Marco. Marco read it, then set it down carefully. Do you believe him? I think he believes himself. Whether that matters is up to you. Marco was quiet for a long moment. Then, Mom used to say that people aren't just one thing. They're capable of harm and capable of repair. Maybe Vinny figured that out. He looked at his father. Maybe we all can. December brought snow and the holidays. Dominic, who'd spent decades avoiding sentimentality, found himself stringing lights on the brownstone and shopping for toys with an enthusiasm that bemused his former associates. Maria teased him about turning soft. He didn't deny it. On Christmas Eve, Lily asked if they could visit her mother's grave. Marco and Dominic drove her to the small cemetery in Allentown, and they stood together in the cold, Lily holding a bouquet of winter flowers. She set them on the headstone, and then, unexpectedly, she turned to Dominic. "Grandpa, do you think Mama knows you kept your promise?" Dominic crouched down to her level. "I think she knows, and I think she's proud of you." "Why?" "Because you're kind, you're smart, you're everything good in the world, and you came from her." Lily threw her arms around his neck, and Dominic held her, this small, fierce person who'd walked into his life and changed everything. Over her head, he met Marco's eyes. His son nodded, a gesture of peace, of forgiveness, of something that looked like hope. The new year began with another surprise. Agent Karen Reese, the federal investigator who'd led the case against Dominic, reached out to schedule a meeting. Dominic's lawyer advised caution, but Reese had specified it was informal, off the record. They met at a coffee shop in Manhattan, neutral ground. Reese got straight to the point. "Mr. Santoro, I'm not here to reopen your case. I'm here because we've been tracking a trafficking operation moving through New York, and your cooperation could help shut it down." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "I'm retired." "I know, but you still have contacts. People trust you. And this operation is hurting kids, young girls being smuggled for labor and worse." She slid a folder across the table. "I'm asking for your help, not as a criminal informant, but as someone who might actually give a damn about protecting children." Dominic opened the folder. Inside were photos of young girls, ages ranging from 5 to 15, who'd gone missing from foster care and immigrant communities. The operation ran through the same docks he'd once controlled. "Why come to me?" "Because the man running it is someone you know, Frankie Costa." The name hit like a punch. Frankie, who'd sat at his table for 20 years. Frankie, who'd helped remove Sal Rasso. Frankie, who apparently had been running a side business that Dominic had never suspected. "You're sure? We've been building the case for 8 months. He's insulated, careful. But if someone could get him to slip up, could get evidence we can actually use." She met his eyes. "I think you're that someone." Dominic closed the folder. "What do you need?" They worked out a plan. Dominic would reach out to Frankie, suggest a meeting to discuss potential business opportunities now that both of them were supposedly out of the game. He'd wear a wire. He'd ask the right questions. It was dangerous. If Frankie suspected, Dominic would be a liability. But it was also, in a strange way, a path to something he'd never had before, genuine redemption. He told Marco that night. "I'm helping the feds take down a trafficking ring." Marco stared at him. "You're what?" "Frankie Costa is moving kids through the docks. Agent Reese asked for my help." "And you said yes." "Dad, this is..." Marco stopped, then laughed in disbelief. "I don't know what this is. Who are you?" "I'm trying to be the man Lily thinks I am." Marco absorbed this, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but you need backup." "I'm coming with you." "No, if something goes wrong." "If something goes wrong, Lily loses both of us. Better that I'm there to make sure nothing goes wrong." They argued for an hour, but Marco was immovable. Finally, Dominic agreed, and they planned the meet with Agent Reese's team. The meeting with Frankie happened on a Tuesday night at a warehouse in Red Hook. Dominic wore the wire, a device so small it was practically invisible, and Marco waited in a car half a block away with 2 federal agents. The warehouse was cold and echoing, and when Frankie walked in, he looked the same as always. Affable, reliable, the kind of man you'd trust with your life. "Dom, good to see you," Frankie said, clasping his hand. "I was surprised to get your call. Thought you were done with all this." "Mostly done. But I heard you were still active, and I thought maybe there was room for an old friend to get back in the game. Frankie studied him, and for a moment Dominic thought he'd miscalculated. Then Frankie smiled. What did you have in mind? I heard you're moving product through the docks. High value, high risk. I still have contacts there. Thought maybe we could partner up. Product's one word for it. Frankie leaned against a crate. But yeah, I've got a good thing going. Girls, mostly. Eastern Europe, Central America. They come through, get placed with buyers. It's steady money. Dominic forced his face to stay neutral. How many girls? Depends on the month. 20, 30. Some go to labor, some go to other things I don't ask. That's the beauty of it, clean hands. Who are the buyers? Frankie's eyes narrowed slightly. Why the interest in details, Dom? Because if I'm investing, I need to know the risk. For a long, tense moment, Frankie said nothing. Then, the buyers are vetted. Politicians, businessmen, people with money and silence, it's airtight. He pushed off the crate. But I'm not sure I believe you're really interested in this. You went clean, Dom. Rumor is you've got a kid in your house now. A little girl, why would you risk that? Dominic's blood went cold. Leave her out of this. See, that's what I thought. You've changed. Frankie pulled a gun from his jacket. And that makes you dangerous. Before Dominic could react, the warehouse doors burst open. Federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Frankie spun, firing wildly, and Dominic dropped to the ground as bullets ricocheted off metal. Agents returned fire, and Frankie went down, clutching his leg, screaming. Marco appeared, grabbing Dominic's arm and pulling him toward the exit. Move! They ran, sirens wailing behind them, and didn't stop until they reached Marco's car. Dominic's hands were shaking. He knew he was going to kill me. But he didn't. The wire worked. They got him. Agent Reese found them 20 minutes later. We have Frankie in custody. He's talking, trying to cut a deal. We'll dismantle the entire operation within the week. She looked at Dominic with something like respect. You did a good thing tonight. Those girls, you saved them. Dominic nodded, but he felt no triumph. Only exhaustion and the sharp awareness of how close he'd come to never seeing Lily again. The story broke in the newspapers the next day. Former crime boss Dominic Santoro had cooperated with federal agents to expose a human trafficking ring, leading to the arrest of multiple suspects and the rescue of 17 girls. The coverage was cautiously positive. Some papers framed him as a villain trying to buy redemption, others as a complex figure who'd chosen, finally, to do right. Marco read the articles at breakfast while Lily ate pancakes. You're famous again, he said dryly. Not the kind of famous I wanted, but the kind you earned. That afternoon, Agent Reese visited the brownstone. She brought someone with her, a woman in her early 30s who introduced herself as Carla. I was one of the girls moved through that operation 10 years ago, Carla said softly. I escaped, built a new life. When I heard what you did, I wanted to thank you. Those girls you saved, they'll have a chance because of you. Dominic didn't know what to say. He'd spent so many years hurting people, directly or indirectly, that the idea of being thanked felt surreal. I'm glad they're safe, he managed. After they left, Lily looked up from her coloring book. Grandpa, were those people thanking you for being a hero? Marco started to answer, but Dominic held up a hand. Not a hero, sweetheart. Just someone trying to fix mistakes. That sounds like a hero to me. Winter softened into spring. The trafficking case continued to unfold, with more arrests and more rescued victims. Dominic's name was tied to the case in every report, and while some of his old associates muttered about betrayal, others quietly reached out to say they understood. The world was changing, they said. Maybe it was time they all changed with it. In March, Marco proposed to a woman he'd met at Lily's school, a kindergarten teacher named Sarah who had no idea about his family's history until their third date and decided she didn't care. They married in a small ceremony in May, and Lily was the flower girl, beaming in a white dress that Maria had helped her pick out. Dominic gave a toast at the reception. I've done a lot of things in my life I'm not proud of, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But I'm proud of my son. I'm proud of the man he became despite me, and I'm proud that he's given me a second chance. He raised his glass. To Marco and Sarah, to family, to being better than we were. The guests cheered, and Marco hugged him, and for the first time in Dominic's long, complicated life, he felt something close to peace. Summer brought Lily's 6th birthday. They celebrated with a party at a park, complete with a bouncy castle and a cake shaped like a unicorn. Lily invited her entire class, and Dominic watched from a picnic table as she ran wild with her friends, laughing, free, alive. Sarah sat beside him. "You're good with her," she said. "I'm trying. Marco told me what happened, all of it your past, the trafficking case, everything." She looked at him. "I think what you did took courage. Walking away from power isn't easy. It's easier when you have something worth walking toward. Lily's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one." That evening, after the party ended and the guests went home, Lily asked Dominic to read her a bedtime story. He sat on the edge of her bed, the stuffed rabbit, still missing one ear, tucked under her arm, and read about brave princesses and dragons that turned out to be misunderstood. When he finished, she said, "Grandpa, do you think my mama is proud of me?" "I know she is." "Do you think she's proud of you?" The question caught him off guard. He thought of Rebecca in that hospital bed, trusting him with her daughter's life. "I hope so," he said honestly. "I am," Lily said. "I'm proud of you." Something in Dominic's chest broke and healed at the same time. "Thank you, sweetheart. Will you always keep me safe?" "Always." She smiled, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Dominic sat there until her breathing evened out, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, and he thought about promises. The ones he'd made and the ones he'd kept. The ones he'd broken and the ones he was still trying to honor. He'd been a lot of things in his life: criminal, boss, father, failure. But sitting there in the dim light of Lily's room, he was simply a grandfather, and that felt like more than enough. That fall, Agent Reese called one last time. "The trials are wrapping up," she said. "Frankie and the others are going away for a long time. The girls we recovered are in safe homes. The operation is finished." "Good. There's one more thing. The Bureau wants to recognize your contribution. A commendation, maybe some kind of public acknowledgement." Dominic laughed. "No thanks, I don't need recognition. I just needed to do the right thing." "Understood. But for what it's worth, Santoro, you surprised me. I thought you were just another mobster looking for a reduced sentence. I was wrong." "We both were," Dominic said. "I thought I'd never get a chance to be someone different." After the call, he went to find Marco and Lily. They were in the backyard, raking leaves into piles that Lily promptly jumped in, scattering them everywhere. Marco looked up, exasperated and laughing, and waved. Dominic joined them, and together they raked and jumped and laughed until the sun set and Maria called them in for dinner. That night, as they sat around the table, Dominic, Marco, Sarah, Lily, and Maria, Dominic looked at each of them and realized this was what he'd been searching for his whole life. Not power or respect or fear. Just this. People who chose to be with him not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Family, real and complicated and imperfect. Family that had cost him everything and given him everything in return. The brownstone in Cobble Hill stands quietly now, its past known but not spoken of. Neighbors see the older man who walks the little girl to school each morning, who sits on the stoop in the evenings reading the paper, who nods politely when they pass. They don't know about the empire he built, or the lives he damaged, or the moment a 4-year-old girl appeared at his door and demanded he become someone better. They don't need to know. That story is finished. This story, the one about a mafia boss who adopted a little girl, who found his lost son, who walked away from power to protect the only thing that mattered. This story is still being written. It's written in school permission slips and bedtime stories, in Marco's laughter and Sarah's patience, in the way Lily holds Dominic's hand when they cross the street. On a cold November evening, almost 2 years after Lily first arrived, Dominic sits in his study looking at the photographs that line his desk. Rebecca and baby Lily. Marco and Lily at her first day of school. The whole family last Christmas, smiling in front of the tree. He picks up the last photograph, just taken last week, of him and Lily at the park, her arms around his neck, both of them grinning. The caption, written in Lily's careful printing, reads, "Me and Grandpa, best friends." Dominic sets it down carefully and thinks about legacies. The one he left in the streets of Brooklyn, violence and fear and money stained with blood. And the one he's building now, quieter, smaller, but infinitely more valuable. A little girl who feels safe. A son who came home. A family stitched together from broken pieces and second chances. He doesn't know if redemption is real or if you can ever truly escape the things you've done. But he knows this. When Lily calls him from the hallway, asking if he'll play checkers, he goes. When Marco needs advice, he listens instead of commanding. When Sarah asks him to watch Lily for the weekend so she and Marco can have time alone, he says yes with gratitude. These small acts, repeated daily, are his new empire. Not built on fear, but on love. Not enforced by violence, but earned through presence. And every night, when he locks the doors and turns off the lights and checks on Lily one last time before bed, he whispers the same words, part prayer, part promise. I kept you safe. And for now, in this moment, in this house full of people who chose to stay, that is enough.